Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to Radio Wasteland. I'm your host, Chauncey Haworth, and my co-host, Kara, is MIA. I thought she was going to be here today. Apparently, she is not, which leads me to no small amount of concern. So, in the interest of filling her dainty shoes, I'm like researching a lot of these UFO sightings that are going on, and it seems like a lot of them go on in Florida. We got William online. William, you there with us?
Yes, sir, I am. How are you?
Not bad. I was about to get started here, just kind of talking about all the UFO sightings, and as I look at all of these UFO sightings, I see a lot of them come up in Florida, and I learned something interesting about Florida the other day. That how they've sort of become this sort of state that we all make fun of. It seems like they. So I found out about something. This might be old news to everybody else, but there's something called the Sunshine Act, and the Sunshine Act is something that goes on in Florida where all their arrests are public record, and so I'm not entirely so sure that Florida is any more shady than the rest of us. Because as I read the UFO sightings and stuff like that, a lot of them are coming out of Florida. And today's show, we're talking about credibility in the UFO community. And I was thinking, I wonder how much this is helping the UFO community. So I thought I'd give Florida a break and say that the only reason why you're getting this bad rap is because your local government decided to air your dirty laundry.
That's a distinct possibility, yeah.
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 How are you doing today, William?
I'm good. Just trying to get through another hot day in South Texas.
Is it still hot there?
It's lowered. The highs have lowered to the mid 90s.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound too bad, but usually August is the hottest month where we average like 101 degrees Fahrenheit. So 95 degrees is a break.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Same here. We actually had a fairly reasonable summer. It seems to be we actually opened the windows the other day.
That's great.
I know. That's wild.
I'm not sure if my window's open anymore. We'll see.
Right. It might be melted shut.
Possibly, yeah. It's crazy. Outrageous.
All right, so our topic today that we're really talking about, and by the way, for the listeners at home, our guest is William Pullin, and our topic today that we're talking about is sort of credibility in the UFO community and the credibility of the UFO community at large. Do you think that the UFO community is more or less credible than they were? I kind of see, I look back on the UFO community. Maybe this is a good place to start. When do you think the heyday of credibility for the community was?
Gosh, I don't know if there ever really was one, but at certain parts of the history of the UFO community, I guess we could say since the late 40s, there's been times where there's been civilian organizations that have been pretty credible. Their approach to investigations has been with a high level of integrity, a high level of professionalism, pretty scientific. And then there have been other times where investigative efforts have kind of waned a little bit. And there's some individuals that have become celebrities in the community that have been a little less credible, whose backgrounds have been a little shaky. So it kind of comes and goes. I don't know if there was really a heyday, but in the modern era and today's environment, I think there's a little problem with the credibility, a little bit. Although the other side of the coin, the UFO issue is a little more in the news now because the media is covering it in a legitimate light. So there's kind of a double edge to that. So
right.
But I think there definitely is. There's an issue with credibility now because there are certain individuals in the community that aren't. They're not conducting themselves with a high level of professionalism, and I'm a big stickler for that. Especially when you're, I guess when one individual is a black sheep, it paints the entire community in a bad light, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I had written something in the post about the show when we posted it up on Facebook that we sort of live in this day and age where half the country doesn't trust one another. A large portion of the country just doesn't trust anybody at all. And then there are a lot of people out there that are able to make some serious dollars off of some really wild claims, from medicine to all other things. So it's like it's leaving this world of before. I feel like even outside of ufology, I felt like before maybe you could research something a little bit and then have a grasp and make an informed decision. But at this point, the amount of research is almost not worth the effort of making that informed decision, I feel.
Agreed.
It's like, it's just, by the time you've made that informed decision, really, how relevant is what you're making your decision on any longer?
Yeah, and that's true. And another thing that's changed in recent years, well, not recent years, recent decades, is the internet. So information is more easily accessible now. So you can have someone doing research from behind a keyboard. The issue is, what percentage of the information on the internet is legitimate and valid?
Right.
That's a problem because anybody can go on the internet and just post whatever they want. So that's become an issue, the validity of information. It's easy for someone to find information they want about a case, and if it conforms to their belief system, they're happy.
Right.
And they don't bother to do their homework and find out if the information is valid at all. And then on the other, to add to that, what you were saying, the environment we're in has become very polarized. People don't trust each other. People don't trust anything. They don't trust their government. There's no gray area. People have their own positions, whether it's political or otherwise, and there's a lot of discourse in the country. People don't get along as well as they used to. So that kind of bleeds into, I guess, on a societal level, that's true, and it's bled into other parts of society. And now it's bled into the UFO community now. It's reared its ugly head in the UFO issue nowadays, and that's troubling because now you have researchers that can't work together because they're of different political faiths or what have you. It's kind of a bizarre situation.
Oh, really? So
right now.
So people's politics is that? So I was thinking just ufology beliefs, but you're saying that their politics is putting a divide in their research.
Yes, they're in past decades, people could overlook their personal positions. Because they were acting in a professional manner.
Right.
They were researching something that was distinctly separate from anything else. So their political, sexual, religious positions were a non-issue. Because they were investigating the UFO phenomenon in a professional manner. So who they were as individuals is a non-issue.
Yeah.
Now that's changed.
I wonder how much of that is like etiquette, like they lived in a time where it wasn't something that you should discuss. Like, I've kind of was raised with the idea that you don't discuss money in public, and so I really I never really talk about money in public because I was kind of raised to think that way, I'm not saying it's right. It's just, so I wonder if that's because now we live in a time where people live in a world where they should be screaming it at the top of their lungs with social media and putting what you had for breakfast and how you feel about Beto and everything up on the internet. All right, William, we're coming up here on break. You're listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. We're talking about credibility in the UFO community. Come on back. Radio Wasteland comes to you from the Reading studios of Free Fire Radio, 96.5 FM and AM 1460. Visit Radio Wasteland at Instagram at instagram.com/Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, William Pullin. I hadn't really thought about that, about the divide. Now this has got me thinking, when we were originally talking about a divide in the UFO community, I was thinking this sort of nuts and bolts researchers and these sort of religious connection folks.
Yeah.
Is there a parallel to politics in that, or is that a separate divide in there?
There's all sorts of things that divide up the community. You're right. There's a nuts and bolts aspect. There's there's segment of the community that believes in the nuts and bolts kind of theories, more of a New Age approach, religious approach.
New Age, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a good term. We might both be wrong, but even the term UFO community, no one really knows what that is defined as. It's kind of the term disclosure. No one really knows. The definition depends on the person you ask, but having said that, yeah, there's the belief structures have their own little niches, and now you have, and I think it's a direct result of social media because people are able to interact from behind a keyboard.
Right.
So they're not being very careful what they're saying. They can attack somebody from 1,000 miles away, as opposed to when they were actually discussing things in person. They may be far less comfortable making those kind of statements to somebody to their face. So definitely politics has now kind of bled into that polarized, fractured way the community is built now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand it. Before the show, Jared and I were talking about a TV show that we watched called Carnival Row, and I wasn't sure about the acting. I thought it was a little dodgy, so I go to read the reviews, and the reviews on this thing are all political, talking about sick of having their agendas shoved down their throats and stuff like that. And finally, I read like 25 down, and one guy's just all the writing was terrible, and that guy knows. It's like, so yeah, that's definitely the case. So if somebody's going online, which is where people go now, I guess, if somebody is going to look for UFO information, contemporary UFO information, of course, the argument can be made that there's lots of great, reliable information in previous books that I'm aware that you have a reasonable library of. But in looking for contemporary information, how likely is it that you think they find reliable information?
Well, it's out there. It's available on the internet. But you have to do your homework. You can't just find a website and assume it's reputable, assume the information is valid.
Right.
The valid cases that tend to are actually grounded in reality, regardless of what the explanation is. The good information usually is on multiple websites, not just one. And there are certain websites that are clearly more reputable than other ones. Other ones are just looking for likes or selling a product or pushing an agenda or trying to control the narrative. The more high quality websites providing the quality information just provide the information,
right, without
kind of pushing any kind of explanation. They're just giving out the facts and the details and allowing the reader to make up their own mind. So it's out there. But I'm very cautious with the internet, be it Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or the internet at large, beyond social media. I'm very cautious about it because there's valid information out there, but there's so much other stuff out there that's not valid. It takes a lot of time to weed out all this stuff. And
it does,
especially an issue,
especially with this that is so unfacted. There is very few solid concrete answers, next to no physical solid concrete evidence, and a lot of talk. And the internet has given a platform to everybody. I mean, look at me. Here I am. I got a platform. We're using it right now.
True. Yeah, that's right.
So what should we come up with? Sometimes Kara, when she does her news, she makes some snarky comment at the end of her news about worshiping our overlords or something like that. And I'm waiting for the day for me to read one of Kara's snarky comments in somebody else's blog about how it's the truth or something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a I write blog postings on my blog on Facebook, but every so often I'll write a short snippet, and I always entitle it "Memo to the UFO Community." Mm-hmm. And it's just a little saying that pops in my head, or I hear someone say something that is really thought-provoking. And I wrote down a few days ago, "Memo to the UFO Community, : don't be a yes researcher, be a show me the data researcher."
Right.
Too many researchers are embracing everything to keep the invitations going to conferences, or trying to sell a book, or trying to push their own celebrity status.
Yeah, I definitely
agree. I think that affects the credibility of that research. It affects their integrity.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, you know? and so my friend Rich Hoffman, who's been a researcher for decades and has great credibility and very grounded, said, "Amen, brother, amen." Because without data and evidence, all we have is stories. That says it all right there. And he's been at this for many, many years, longer than I have been. And he has experience more than I have, and a point of view that I don't have because of that experience. And for him to say that speaks volumes. He's exactly right. Without physical evidence, without a good amount of objective data, all you have are stories, and that's not good enough. That's not good enough. It's not good enough in the scientific community. But if it's good enough in the UFO field, that doesn't help us. I mean, anybody could just make up a story, and if people believe it, that doesn't make it a reality. You have to prove that story with valid evidence and data. But too often, people are willing to just believe everything and not bother to see if it's actually true.
Well, it also feels like now we're in a day and age where you can't necessarily believe the evidence and data. You know, we're sitting here talking about talking on the news and across the internet about stolen elections and proxy wars and all this stuff, and you know, very little of it has, you know, just for transparency, I did not vote for Donald Trump, but even on my side of stuff, very little of all this stuff that's been thrown out there actually has some sort of concrete thing that can be handed in front of them. But man, there's a lot of talk. And like, no matter where you are, you know, there is just a lot of talk. And, you know, you can go on CNN and you can go on Fox News and you can go on whatever website that you want. And there is a massive amount of speculation, you know. So I had somebody talking to me about Fox News, you know, my uncle. And he has different beliefs than I have, and we get along. Yeah. And he's just, well, they have very clear reporting. And I'm just, how can you possibly say that they have, like, clear, honest reporting? Then I realized that he was talking about the news. Part of what's been confusing to me about the internet and about the news and all this stuff is there is no definitive line between news reporting and editorial. There is this big gray area to the point where, and don't get me wrong, on both CNN and Fox News, there is a portion that is supposed to be news and a portion that's supposed to be editorial, but there's no like light that they flick on that tells you we're now in the editorial part and we're now in the news part and stuff like that. And I think we've all become very accustomed to delivering information like that and processing information that's been thrown at us that way. And the UFO community, I think, is a prime place for speculation to get blurred together with the facts.
Agreed. Yeah, totally. I mean, you turn on the news, and a journalist's job is to find information, validate the information, and give the information to the public. Mm-hmm. Their job is not to give their point of view. Their job is not to make subjective statements. Their job is to simply communicate the facts, and that's it. But so often you see journalists, newscasters, or what have you, give the story, and then they give their point of view. They give their own opinion.
Right.
That's not their job as a journalist. That's not their job, period. Going to the UFO field, too often people are misconstruing statements of belief and opinion as facts. I was on another program last month, and the host of the program said he felt that, and this is his opinion, and everyone's opinion deserves at least respect.
Of course.
His point of view was statements of belief by individuals that have certain points of view that are qualified to talk in that direction can be taken as evidence. And I had an issue with that. And he asked me my point of view, and I said, well, my point of view is, if I'm a 4-star general that has served in the Army for 40 years, and I'm chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and if I say there are green cows on the moon, that doesn't make it reality. Regardless of my position in life, regardless of my credibility, statements of belief are not evidence.
Well, that's a great place for us to take a break, and we happen to be coming right up on one. You're listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. Stick around.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Vicky Wills.
This is the restless and smooth cigars, cause the very first shuttle to the planet Mars was a disco queen in 76. Castrates cows, that's how she gets her kicks. She buys them up and shoots them down like Billy the Dead in Jonestown.
Chauncey and Kara on Radio Wasteland right here on 96.5 FM and 1460 AM. That's Free Fire Radio. And don't forget to follow Radio Wasteland on Facebook at facebook.com/radiowasteland.us.
Hate to see you hungry.
All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. I'm talking to William Pullin. We're talking about credibility in the UFO community. William, before we went to break, we were talking about how testimony can't be considered fact and stuff like that. And that got me to thinking that surely in an exploratory part of research, and this is just playing devil's advocate to maybe back what the other guy was saying just a bit, that there is a point where, in lieu of all other facts, you maybe have to give more credence to testimony because there are no other facts. There are so few bits of information coming in. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and actually, I need to backtrack. He was specifically, the other host I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Was specifically saying about, his question was about statements of belief from individuals, and those statements are not really connected with a case per se. If you have a case, I think first-hand testimony can be taken as evidence.
I see.
Definitely, I wholeheartedly believe that. I think what he was referring to was just random individuals that have points of view that they're communicating, and we can't just accept them at face value just because they're qualified, just because they have a certain position in the world.
Yeah.
But no, first-hand testimony definitely is, if collected correctly, can be hard evidence, and it's another chain of evidence that helps you along in your investigation of a case. Definitely, Yeah,
absolutely. So, really, how do you think we sort of, how do we fix this? Well, let me ask you this first before we move on to some sort of solving answer, which I'm sure we won't get, but we can speculate.
Sure, yeah.
How much information is actually out there that we think is actually hard quality information? Now, I realize most of it is a few photographs and government paperworks and stuff like this. How much are we talking about? A file cabinet, a room full, a building full? How much information does the UFO community have access to that we would consider reliable information?
Yeah, I can count on one hand, the number of UFO photographs I think have held up under scrutiny that are still unexplained. That may contain images of non-terrestrial structured craft. Very few, maybe 5 or 6 at the most. I think I can think of 2 movies that were filmed back in the 50s that were examined by the military and other civilian organizations that have held up under scrutiny. They remain unexplained. That may contain images of, again, something extraterrestrial. There's a ton of data. There's a voluminous amount of sighting data, testimony, landing traces, physical changes to environment environmental changes like to plants and animals, things of that nature, that have been documented around the world. There's radar traces. There's lots of testimony from individuals that saw the same thing from different geographical locations that don't know each other, which is pretty strong. So there's a lot of data out there. But we don't have a piece of a craft. We don't have a piece of an organic material, like a piece of a body, something that's definitively non-terrestrial, something that didn't originate from Earth. There's lots of stories about that. But as civilians, we don't have access to that, so those stories may not be true. We just don't know.
Right.
But we have a huge amount of data, though. We do have that.
And I would say that I would put a fair amount of, obviously the stuff coming out of the military isn't a hoax, or I guess maybe it is. I can't see why they would want to hoax us, but I guess it's possible. But I guess that's another example of the world we live in, where I'm thinking that the hoax is the military hoaxing us into believing in aliens. I mean, how far we've come for me to even suggest that, I guess.
Well, there's certainly disinformation. The military certainly has provided that on some level in past decades.
Oh yeah.
They don't have to now, though. The UFO community does a good enough job providing itself with disinformation at this point in time. But yeah, the military clearly has been, at the very least, very interested in the UFO topic, and they've spent taxpayer dollars to investigate what's going on. So clearly something's going on, and clearly they've been interested in it. They're just not ready to tell us, and I don't think they ever will. But they. Yeah.
What do you think prompted them to come forward? Do you think they came forward because they were caught and the cat was out of the bag, or do you think they came forward to try to sort of look for civilian help in processing the information?
I have no idea. I've discussed this with other friends of the community, and some thought maybe an event transpired that we don't know about yet that motivated the change. Maybe they simply wanted to be a little more open to the public. Mm-hmm. On some level. Maybe they wanted to solicit, like you said, civilian/scientific help or assistance, wrapping their head around this stuff. But I don't know. I know there's not. The media has released, or the military has released through the media, more information than they had before. But none of the information is really groundbreaking. They've admitted their research in military UFO interactions.
I would say some of it's groundbreaking in the sense that you just told me that there were 2 films that you said might be unidentified flying objects, and the military just released ones and said these are. So I mean, we are presented with films that we know these are unidentified flying objects.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're aliens.
I mean, the two have been out. The 2 films I referred to in the 50s have been out for public examination since they were taken, really. But yeah, the films they've released from gun camera footage, yeah, that's groundbreaking. That certainly adds to the amount of data we have. But we're still at an unknown. They filmed something unknown, but it does carry a lot of weight because you have trained observers / meaning military pilots,
right? Yeah,
that couldn't identify what they were observing, and that goes a long way because they have a perspective and a training that you and I don't have. So their testimony is a little stronger because of that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the mere fact that I'm sure they analyzed if it was a glitch or something first before it landed in our hands.
Sure. Oh, yeah. They would have done that. That's a safe assumption. Yeah.
So I guess there's something to be said there. We know we have actual footage of UFOs, and just to clarify to listeners, I think a lot of the time people think, oh, whatever, there's no UFOs. There are UFOs. The government just released some unidentified flying objects, things we don't know. The government just put them out there. Yeah. Are they aliens? I don't know. They might be Wakandans. That's my new. That's my new suggestion. Is that Jared's shaking his head at me? Is that a no?
Yeah. And that brings up something else that you just mentioned. Yeah, UFOs exist. They may not be alien spacecraft,
right?
But clearly unidentified flying objects have been sighted and filmed. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, to a lot of the general public, UFO means alien spacecraft, and they don't mean the same thing.
Right. Yeah, that's not synonymous.
But you're right. Unidentified objects have been filmed by our military personnel. That says a lot by itself, right there.
and hand it to us, which is shocking in itself. It's like I can't help but to think that, I want to think like they slipped this on purpose. They're trying to, prepare us. They want to distract from problems in the government, all sorts of stuff. What probably happened is somebody didn't file the right paperwork, and this information accidentally got filed in the Freedom of Information Act, and they had no choice but to back it up. It's like
that has happened before. We've gotten information, we've gotten documentation about UFOs from the military because they accidentally released it to us.
Right.
That has happened on a few instances. So,
and if I had to bet, that's what I would bet went on here.
Yeah.
And they're having to cover for it. All right, we're coming up on our next break. You're listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. We're talking about credibility in the UFO community. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how to navigate it, maybe where to go to get around it, and really what to ask yourself, should I even be reading this? So you're listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. Come on back.
You're listening to Free Fire Radio 96.5 FM, 1460 AM. You're listening to Radio Wasteland with Chauncey and Kara. Find all our shows and archives by visiting Radio Wasteland at radiowasteland.us.
All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. I'm talking with William Pullin. We're talking about credibility in the UFO community. So, William, how do we navigate this? What do we do? How do we move forward?
Okay, so I guess I'm taking it. I'm taking that question as from a researcher standpoint. We have to maintain a high level of integrity, objectivity. We can't be biased. We need to just look at the data objectively and go where the data leads us. That's one angle. Two, in our interactions with the public, we have to be highly professional. Anything less paints us all in a bad light. If you have one individual that acts less than professional, it makes the entire field look less than professional, which is, even in society, one bad cop makes all the rest of the cops look bad. That's
right.
a good analogy.
It is a good analogy.
If you have one individual acting the fool, well, then the rest are assumed to be in the same light, and that's completely incorrect. So we need to all be highly professional in our interactions.
The cop thing is a great comparison, because I think that the law enforcement community is having this problem. How does the community deal with a bad apple? Because if you don't support your own community, you can destroy it. But if you overly support your own community, you can sabotage everything and cause problems along the way. So as part of the research community, how do you deal with the bad apples?
You have to hold them accountable for their actions. And I'm going to come off as overly critical of MUFON here, but MUFON as an organization has been around 50 years. They've done a great job collecting data. They have made the UFO issue more accessible to the public. But in recent years, there have been developments in the higher organization, statements and posts in social media made by certain individuals, and those individuals were not held accountable for their actions. And when an organization drags their feet addressing such a negative issue, it paints the organization in a bad light. It makes them look, again, less than professional.
Right, yeah.
So when that situation comes up, it has to be addressed immediately and in a professional manner. It cannot be swept under the rug. It cannot be ignored. Because, again, when that's ignored, it paints the whole field in a bad light. And if there's one thing about the UFO field is, in the past few decades, since the beginning of this whole enigma, the UFO topic has always struggled for legitimacy. It's always struggled to have some level of respect, not just from the public, but from the scientific community. But when you have less than professional behavior, these kind of situations going on, it's going to perpetuate that problem. It's going to make it worse, and we can't. That kind of behavior cannot be acceptable. It cannot be tolerated. It has to be addressed, and solutions need to be found quickly to alleviate that issue. That's not happening right now. It isn't.
Yeah, and frankly, I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, because we seem to live in a world that fuels this kind of attitude. You know, a world where as the people who walk in the darker corners, what my wife would refer to as the dark web. You know, which it's more her adjective for anything that's off the beaten path now. You know, we walk in these worlds where like Pat Robertson or something is selling like post-apocalyptic sludge food. Is it Pat Robertson? I don't know.
Yeah.
And like, you know, so I think it's going to get worse until it gets better. Now for the non-researcher, for the average Joe that's out there, but they're curious and they want to know more. You know, I'm sure there's a gray area before you become a researcher and while you're just an enthusiast. You know, how do they navigate it?
Do your homework. When you find things on the internet, you want to not research, but look into the information. Is it valid? Do you find it from other sources? Is it relatively accurate? Is it portraying what happened or not happened? When you buy a book from a researcher or see a lecture or go to a conference, do a little homework into the background of that researcher. And what is their take? What is their point of view? It gives you a perspective about the topic. And then read, not just computer-generated information. Read books. Read something physical. Read reports. Read peer-reviewed papers that are out there available from different organizations about this topic, and go from there. I mean, none of us have any of the answers to this enigma, including researchers. We don't. All we have is data. So it's always a positive thing to simply educate oneself, and we're all learning, or we all should be learning as we go forward. So yeah, just gobble up information and do a little bit of homework to find out if the information is valid, and enjoy the process. I mean, it's almost like going to school without the trouble of having to have homework.
Right.
Well,
I've been curious about this. You talking about reading, and I know you have a nice collection of UFO books. That what book would you say has the most, not opinion-wise, but for somebody getting interested, the most snippets of government documents and explanations of situations that really sort of lays it out there in a scientific way for people? What book would you point them to?
I guess I'll name three. One is The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt. He was a former commander of Project Blue Book. That's from 1956. It's still available. I think it's on Amazon, available in audiobook. It's out there. You can actually find it in some of the used bookstores. I would highly recommend the UFO Dossier by Kevin D. Randall. That came out in 2014 or 16. It's pretty recent. It's a thick piece of work, and it examines the UFO topic from a worldwide perspective. And Kevin is a very objective, grounded, non-biased guy. So he's not going to confirm any belief systems. He's just going to simply provide the data and go from there. And from a historical perspective, I would recommend, it's one of two books by John G. Fuller. John G. Fuller was a journalist. He passed away in the 90s. But he wrote two of the greatest books in the UFO field, The Interrupted Journey, about the Betty Barney Hill case, and Incident at Exeter, which is about the 1965 multiple witness UFO sightings in Exeter, New Hampshire. Both those books are written in a highly journalistic, objective way. Any of those four books, I think you can't go wrong with that.
Sounds good. It's a good starting point. You know, I've been thinking about getting one. I've been thinking about actually reading a book.
Do it.
I read so much online that, like, the idea of reading a book makes me want to scratch my eyes out. But I think if I were to read more paper, hopefully I would read less screen.
No, you got to attack it. Do it.
Right.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, you've been listening to William Pullin here on Radio Wasteland. Don't forget to check him out in You For Real, a historical review. Search that up on Facebook. I'm sure it's the only one. And search him up, William Pullin, UFO historian, also on Facebook. If you want to know more, find out more, and find a lot of great information. And William, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Chauncey, again, for everything.
All right, talk to you soon. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland. Thank you for checking us out.